Section 49 of the Book of Household Management. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Book of Household Management by Isabella Beeton. Chapter 22. General Observations on Game. 1006. The common law of England has a maxim, that goods in which no person can claim any property belong, by his or her prerogative, to the king or queen. Accordingly, those animals, those ferae naturae, which come under the denomination of game, are, in our laws, styled his or her majesty's, and may therefore, as a matter of course, be granted by the sovereign to another, in consequence of which another may prescribe to possess the same within a certain precinct or lordship. From this circumstance arose the right of lords of manors or others to the game within their respective liberties. And to protect these species of animals, the game laws were originated, and still remain in force. There are innumerable acts of Parliament inflicting penalties on persons who may illegally kill game, and some of them are very severe, but they cannot be said to answer their end, nor can it be expected that they ever will, whilst there are so many persons of great wealth who have not otherwise the means of procuring game, except by purchase, and who will have it. These must necessarily encourage poaching, which to a very large extent must continue to render all game laws nugatory as to their intended effects upon the rustic population. 1007. The object of these laws, however, is not wholly confined to the restraining of the illegal sportsmen. Even qualified or privileged persons must not kill game at all seasons. During the day, the hours allowed for sporting are from 1 hour before sunrise till 1 hour after sunset, whilst the time of killing certain species is also restricted to certain seasons. For example, the season for bustard shooting is from December 1st to March 1st, for grouse or red grouse from August 12th to December 10th, heath fowl or black game from August 20th to December 20th, partridges from September 1st to February 12th, pheasants from October 1st to February 1st, widgeons, wild ducks, wild geese, wild fowls at any time but in June, July, August, and September. Hares may be killed at any time of the year, under certain restrictions defined by an Act of Parliament of the 10th of George III. 1008. The exercise or diversion of pursuing four-footed beasts of game is called hunting, which to this day is followed in the field and the forest with gun and greyhound. Birds, on the contrary, are not hunted, but shot in the air, or taken with nets or other devices, which is called fowling, or they are pursued and taken by birds of prey, which is called hawking, a species of sport now fallen almost entirely into disrepute in England, though in some parts showing signs of being revived. 1009. In pursuing four-footed beasts, such as deer, boars, and hares, properly termed hunting, mankind were, from the earliest ages, engaged. It was the rudest and most obvious manner of acquiring human support, before the agricultural arts had in any degree advanced. It is an employment, however, requiring both art and contrivance, as well as a certain fearlessness of character, combined with the power of considerable physical endurance. Without these, success could not be very great, but at best the occupation is usually accompanied with rude and turbulent habits, and when combined with these, it constitutes what is termed the savage state of man. As culture advances, and as the soil proportionably becomes devoted to the plough, or to the sustenance of the tamer, or more domesticated animals, the range of the huntsman is proportionably limited, so that when a country has attained to a high state of cultivation, hunting becomes little else than an amusement of the opulent. In the case of fur-bearing animals, however, it is somewhat different, for these continue to supply the wants of civilization with one of its most valuable materials of commerce. 1010. The themes which form the minstrelsy of the earliest ages either relate to the spoils of the chase or the dangers of the battlefield. Even the sacred writings introduce us to Nimrod, the first mighty hunter before the Lord, and tell us that Ishmael, in the solitudes of Arabia, became a skilful bowman, and that David, when yet young, was not afraid to join in combat with the lion or the bear. The Greek mythology teems with hunting exploits. Hercules overthrows the Nemean lion, the Erymanthian boar, and the hydra of Lerna. Diana descends to the earth and pursues the stag, while Aesculapius, Nestor, Theseus, Ulysses, and Achilles are all followers of the chase. Aristotle, sage as he was, advises young men to apply themselves early to it, and Plato finds in it something divine. Horace exalts it as a preparative exercise for the path of glory, and several of the heroes of Homer are its ardent votaries. The Romans followed the hunting customs of the Greeks, and the ancient Britons were hunters before Julius Caesar invaded their shores. 1011. Although the ancient Britons followed hunting, however, they did not confine themselves solely to its pursuit. They bred cattle and tilled the ground, and to some extent indicated the rudimentary state of a pastoral and agricultural life. But in every social change, the sports of the field maintained their place. After the expulsion of the Danes, and during the brief restoration of the Saxon monarchy, these were still followed. Even Edward the Confessor, who would join in no other secular amusements, took the greatest delight, says William of Malmesbury, to follow a pack of swift hounds in pursuit of game, and to cheer them with his voice. 1012. Nor was Edward the only English sovereign who delighted in the pleasures of the chase. William the Norman and his two sons who succeeded him were passionately fond of the sport, and greatly circumscribed the liberties of their subjects in reference to the killing of game. The privilege of hunting in the royal forests was confined to the king and his favorites, and in order that these umbrageous retreats might be more extensive, whole villages were depopulated, places of worship leveled with the ground, and every means adopted that might give a sufficient amplitude of space, in accordance with the royal pleasure, for the beasts of the chase. King John was likewise especially attached to the sports of the field, whilst Edward III was so enamored of the exercise that even during his absence at the wars in France he took with him 60 couples of stag hounds, and as many hare hounds, and every day amused himself either with hunting or hawking. Great in wisdom, as the Scotch Solomon, James I, conceited himself to be, he was addicted to the amusements of hunting, hawking, and shooting. Yea, it is even asserted that his precious time was divided between hunting, the bottle, and his standish. To the first he gave his fair weather, to the second his dull, and to the third his cloudy. From his days down to the present, the sports of the field have continued to hold their high reputation, not only for the promotion of health, but for helping to form that manliness of character which enters so largely into the composition of the sons of the British soil. That it largely helps to do this, there can be no doubt. The late Duke of Grafton, when hunting, was, on one occasion, thrown into a ditch. A young curate, engaged in the same chase, cried out, "Lie still, my lord," leapt over him, and pursued his sport. Such an apparent want of feeling might be expected to have been resented by the Duke, but not so. On his being helped up by his attendant, he said, "That man shall have the first good living that falls to my disposal. Had he stopped to have given me his sympathy, I never would have given him anything." Such was the manly sentiment of the Duke, who delighted in the exemplification of a spirit similarly ardent as his own in the sport, and above the baseness of an assumed sorrow. 1013. That hunting has in many instances been carried to an excess is well known, and the match given by the Prince Esterhazy, Regent of Hungary, on the signing of the treaty of peace with France, is not the least extraordinary upon record. On that occasion there were killed 160 deer, 100 wild boars, 300 hares, and 80 foxes. That was the achievement of one day. Enormous, however, as this slaughter may appear, it is greatly inferior to that made by the contemporary King of Naples on a hunting expedition. That sovereign had a larger extent of ground at his command, and a longer period for the exercise of his talents. Consequently, his sport, if it can be so called, was proportionably greater. It was pursued during his journey to Vienna, in Austria, Bohemia, and Moravia, when he killed 5 bears, 1,820 boars, 1,950 deer, 1,145 does, 1,625 roebucks, 11,121 rabbits, 13 wolves, 17 badgers, 16,354 hares, and 354 foxes. In birds, during the same expedition, he killed 15,350 pheasants and 12,335 partridges. Such an amount of destruction can hardly be called sport. It resembles more the indiscriminate slaughter of a battlefield, where the scientific engines of civilized warfare are brought to bear upon defenseless savages. 1014. Deer and hares may be esteemed as the only 4-footed animals now hunted in Britain for the table, and even those are not followed with the same ardor as they were wont to be. Still, there is no country in the world where the sport of hunting on horseback is carried to such an extent as in Great Britain, and where the pleasures of the chase are so well understood and conducted on such purely scientific principles. The fox, of all the beasts of the field, is now considered to afford the best sport. For this it is infinitely superior to the stag, for the real huntsman can only enjoy that chase when the deer is sought for and found like other game which are pursued with hounds. In the case of finding an outlying fallow deer, which is unharbored in this manner, great sport is frequently obtained, but this is now rarely to be met with in Britain. In reference to hare hunting, it is much followed in many parts of this and the sister island, but by the true fox hunter it is considered as a sport only fit to be pursued by women and old men. Although it is less dangerous and exciting than the fox chase, however, it has great charms for those who do not care for the hard riding which the other requires. 1015. The art of taking or killing birds is called fowling, and is either practiced as an amusement by persons of rank or property, or for a livelihood by persons who use nets and other apparatus. When practiced as an amusement, it principally consists of killing them with a light firearm called a fowling piece, and the sport is secured to those who pursue it by the game laws. The other means by which birds are taken consist in imitating their voices, or leading them, by other artifices, into situations where they become entrapped by nets, bird-lime, or otherwise. For taking large numbers of birds, the pipe or call is the most common means employed, and this is done during the months of September and October. We will here briefly give a description of the modus operandi pursued in this sport. A thin wood is usually the spot chosen, and under a tree, at a little distance from the others, a cabin is erected, and there are only such branches left on the tree as are necessary for the placing of the bird-lime, and which are covered with it. Around the cabin are placed avenues with twisted perches, also covered with bird-lime. Having thus prepared all that is necessary, the bird-catcher places himself in the cabin, and at sunrise and sunset imitates the cry of a small bird calling the others to its assistance. Supposing that the cry of the owl is imitated, immediately different kinds of birds will flock together at the cry of their common enemy, when at every instant they will be seen falling to the ground, their wings being of no use to them, for their having come in contact with the bird-lime. The cries of those which are thus situated now attract others, and thus are large numbers taken in a short space of time. If owls were themselves desired to be taken, it is only during the night that this can be done by counterfeiting the squeak of the mouse. Larks, other birds, and waterfowl are sometimes taken by nets, but to describe fully the manner in which this is done would here occupy too much space. 1016. Feathered game have, from time immemorial, given gratification to the palate of man. With the exception of birds of prey and some other species, Moses permitted his people to eat them, and the Egyptians made offerings to their priests of their most delicate birds. The ancient Greeks commenced their repasts with little roasted birds, and feathered game, amongst the Romans, was served as the second course. Indeed, several of the ancient gourmands of the imperial city were so fond of game that they brought themselves to ruin by eating flamingos and pheasants. Quote, "Some modern nations, the French among others," says M. Soyer, "formerly ate the heron, crane, crow, stork, swan, cormorant, and bittern. The first three especially were highly esteemed, and L'Elevant, cook of Charles VII, teaches us how to prepare these meager, tough birds." Beeton says that, in spite of its revolting taste when unaccustomed to it, the bittern is, however, among the delicious treats of the French. This writer also asserts that a falcon or a vulture either roasted or boiled, is excellent eating, and that if one of these birds happened to kill itself in flying after game, the falconer instantly cooked it. Lebeau calls the heron a royal viand. 1017. The heron was hunted by the hawk, and the sport of hawking is usually placed at the head of those amusements that can only be practised in the country. This precedency is probably obtained from its being a pastime too generally followed by the nobility, not in Great Britain only, but likewise on the continent. In former times persons of high rank rarely appeared in public without their dogs and their hawks. The latter they carried with them when they journeyed from one country to another, and sometimes even took them to battle with them, and would not part with them when taken prisoners, even to obtain their own liberty. Such birds were esteemed as the ensigns of nobility, and no action was reckoned more dishonorable in a man of rank than that of giving up his hawk. We have already alluded to the hunting propensities of our own Edward the Third, and we may also allude to his being equally addicted to hawking. According to Froissart, when this sovereign invaded France, he took with him 30 falconers on horseback, who had charge of his hawks, and every day, as his royal fancy inclined him, he either hunted or went to the river for the purpose of hawking. In the great and powerful, the pursuit of game as a sport is allowable, but in those who have to earn their bread by the sweat of their brow, it is to be condemned. In Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy we find a humorous story, told by Poggius the Florentine, who reprobates this folly in such persons. It is this: a physician of Milan, that cured madmen, had a pit of water in his house, in which he kept his patients, some up to their knees, some to the girdle, some to the chin, pro modo insaniae, as they were more or less affected. One of them by chance, that was well recovered, stood in the door, and seeing a gallant pass by with a hawk on his fist, well mounted, with his spaniels after him, would needs know to what use all this preparation served. He made answer, to kill certain fowl. The patient demanded again, what his fowl might be worth, which he killed in a year. He replied, 5 or 10 crowns, and when he urged him further, what his dogs, horse, and hawks stood him in, he told him 400 crowns. With that the patient bade him begone, as he loved his life and welfare. For if our master come and find thee here, he will put thee in the pit, amongst the madmen, up to the chin. Thus reproving the madness of such men as will spend themselves in those vain sports to the neglect of their business and necessary affairs. 1018. As the inevitable result of social progress is, at least, to limit, if not entirely to suppress such sports as we have here been treating of, much of the romance of country life has passed away. This is more especially the case with falconry, which had its origin about the middle of the 4th century, although lately some attempts have been rather successfully made to institute a revival of the gentle art of hawking. Julius Firmicus, who lived about that time, is, so far as we can find, the first Latin author who speaks of falconers, and the art of teaching one species of birds to fly after and catch others. The occupation of these functionaries has now, however, all but ceased. New and nobler efforts characterize the aims of mankind in the development of their civilization, and the sports of the field have, to a large extent, been superseded by other exercises. It may be less healthful and invigorating, but certainly more elegant, intellectual, and humanizing. End of section 49. Recording by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California for LibriVox. Fall 2007.